All right. Hello, Tippy. My name's Mike Tamalo. As Brian said, I run a small startup called Unicorn Markets. There's 3 of us now. When I made this game, there was just me, so I had some time on my hands. I'm going to show you. A couple games before I show you exactly what I created. So the first one is Nelly. What's up?
Make it bigger.
Okay.
Option plus. Yeah, command plus.
Okay. You want to see the code? I'm literally just CDing in somewhere and then running a script. So, I'll go through everything if anybody needs it. So, Nelly.py. It's actually called Nelly's Rooftop Garden, and this was made with Pi Games. So, it got the highest rating out of all the historical Pi weeks. And then all you do is you drag one of these guys over, and then these all have different properties. That's kind of a bug there. It's supposed to go like this right away. They all have different properties. You're trying to bring all the plants to life. With this one, it's steel. Condensation hits it, or steam hits it, and it has condensation. So this game's kind of intuitive on what it's going to do. In the first level, there's just steel, and then as you go along, there's wood, which condensation doesn't build up on. There's more flowers, and there's different items you can use. So you can add extra steam. So this one's wood, and then you move it over here and drive the steam up to the wall, and then the wall brings it down. So one of the beautiful things about this game is it's very intuitive, right? They tell you everything. They even tell you like what little directions you're going to have to turn it and how you have to turn it, right? The only thing is figuring out how to move the log there. I think I actually spent a good probably about 5 minutes like looking at this game being like, it's stupid. What do you do, right? But then I figured out that you pick up the logs and you move them there. And then after that, I probably spent another 2 days trying to beat it. So yeah, I ended up liking it, which is probably why it got such a high score. The other game that I'm going to show you, and this was probably my favorite, I would say. I like it more than the game I created. But I played it a whole bunch, beat as many levels as I could. It's called Byte Life. And this game is pretty awesome. So up flips the bit on or off, right? Right and left, cycle it. So let's do level 1. Level 1's, I'm pretty deep. And then you go around, you got to move this around. And so with one bit, it's easy, right? There's 8 spots, so that's why they call it Byte Life. You get 2, you start moving it around, and then you start getting more and more. So I'm just going to die otherwise. So now there's 3, boom. So it's actually very addicting, right? It's super intuitive once you read the instructions at the beginning, right? It's incredibly simple, and the number of combinations that you can make in this game and the speeds that you can add to it make it very interesting. So my game, meanwhile, took about 48 hours to make because for the first 72 hours or 96 hours, I spent fooling around with stuff that didn't work. So I threw it all away, I followed the tutorials, and then I built something that worked. So let's check it out. And I have some music with it, but it's kind of loud, so there we go. and you just move around. And then I meant to make a weapon. My wife told me it's kind of boring without a weapon, but that takes time, and I didn't have time, so there's no weapon. You just keep running. So, yeah. But it gets harder. This level's easy, and then they move faster, and the physics behind it is just bounce like pool balls all over the screen. So, and the backgrounds are pretty good because they all have like the same layout. So I look for backgrounds that have a layout of like land on the bottom, and then something in the sky, and it's like happy, and then it gets a little more depressing, and then it gets very depressing, right? So it's the evolution of evil. The whole theme of the week was the lesser of two evils, right? So you can press spacebar to restart, or you can press Q to quit. So the theme was the lesser of two evils. I think people were still kind of bitter about the election, so that's, you know, that's why the theme won. So there's a theme every Pi Week that people vote on. So I'm going to try to fly through these slides, and I'll go to GitHub to actually show you the code a little more in depth because the code's kind of small in the slides. So Pi Week 24. This game I made was for Pi Week 23, right? So it's 1 week to create a working game, October 15th through the 22nd. So put that in your calendar because that's Monday. You can get it right here, HTTPS, Pi Week, and then, so this is the initial part of the game. This is how I built it. Pygame init, that starts the Pygame screen, and then initialize the font, and then I just instantiated the game, which there's only one of, and then I run main. So when you go into the actual code, the tutorial that I followed is right here. It's Richard Jones's tutorial, and he has a video on YouTube also. It's a really good tutorial. There's like 20 files in there, and every single one advances on the last one. So it gets you up to pace of exactly what's happening. Pygames is a little funny. You're probably not going to want to do it in a Jupyter Notebook because as soon as you start it, it runs, right? Jupyter Notebook's great for holding variables. You're not holding variables. You're starting a system, and it's a real-time system. It's going to go. So in a real-time system, you got one infinite loop, right? You get one place where you can say, well, true, do everything. And then you have to decide how it does everything. So 3 parts to my loop. A view, a time state init, which changes the stages, analyzes the stages, and then an event processor. So going through that, these were a bunch of attributes. I just kind of stuck them in my game. I needed to put them somewhere. It seemed like the game was the best place to put them. So one of the things that's really important is that self.clock.tick. And first you have to initialize the clock, and then you have to tick it. And what that does is it determines your frames per second. And the DT it returns is a time in milliseconds. So that's going to connect your time to your movement in the game, which is kind of essential. Otherwise, you can say, hey, move here, but based off your frames per second, you don't know how often this is going to be, what the frequency of the action is. So the sprites end up in groups. There's player groups and daemon groups here. So this view, game output, player input. So basically all it does is it has an init, which is that first screen you saw, that black one. And then it has, when the init is equal to false, we're actually playing the stages, right? I put different states in there. It was the easiest way for me to flip the screen, right? I could have created different classes entirely that are scenes. There's actually a very good game that's, I forget the name of it, but it's like something Capture the Crown or something. I could get it for you, but I don't know if I have time. Anyways, it uses different objects for different scenes. So you can do this, different objects, different scenes. Different states, I could just easily put an if statement in there. So that brings me to characters. These are the objects. They bring meaning to the game, right? They live and they die, they move. So inside here, what you'll notice is the character of the player, which is over here. If you can see this, I don't know if everybody can see this, but I can actually zoom in on that. The player ends up accepting the keys. So if you move the keys left or right, up or down, the player's accepting them. The enemies are actually moving the direction based off the game state and the movement of the game, or the time that's changing in the game. So here, I'll go back to those characters in just a minute on GitHub. So these are the timers. Automated events, which keep the game progressing, right? So here we have some really simple ones. Make enemy, switch level, right? Enemies are made at a rate relative to the state. So when I first created this game, I'm surprised I even got a C average from people's votes, but what I ended up doing and what I found out is you need to play the game to test it. So you make a game, you're like, yeah, I got it running, this is awesome, right? So the game I showed you, I actually updated that a couple of times because one of the most valuable parts that wasn't effective in my game was the speed of the movement of the enemies and the time, the amount of enemies that are made. So when I found a balance of it, the levels get progressively harder. But when they were out of balance, what happened was the enemies were moving about half the speed of the main character, and there was about 7 that were created in the first level. And by the 4th level, which is the last level, they were moving about double the speed of the final character, and there was about 60 that were made, right? So you can see where the balance is off, right? So you kind of have to mess around with the algorithm there, and that's the algorithm for how fast the enemies are created, right? I also had to mess around with how long the levels last. So they last 40 seconds here. I figured that was enough time to keep people's attention and maybe build some addiction, right? So characters, like I said, going back. So this is the algorithm I had to mess around with a little bit, right? How fast the enemies are moving based off the state and off the time. So I fooled around with these numbers a little bit. I thought of different ways I could add to them and subtract to them and make that change smaller, right? There's a thing called rects in Pygame, and they declare where the object location is on the screen. So you attach this image to the rect, and then here I can create a collision action that kills the main character. So events, right? This is just part of the same function, right? This is all part of the same function. This is the event processor function. So the event processor was the third one in our loop. And all it does is we're going to stick stuff in a buffer, right? We're going to stick anything that we think is an event in a buffer. So for event in pygame.event.get, right? That looks a lot like a loop. Or it looks a lot like a list, a loop over a list, right? So we're ending up with a loop over a list, and that list is the events. And now the events are clearly their own objects because we're looking at the attribute type. And those were the event types I had to declare somewhere else. Right here, I declared the event types in the front, up on top, and now we're using them here. So we're using the event types. This lets us know what things are possibly going to happen, right? Enemies are going to try to kill you. You got to run. You can't fight because there's no weapons. So then you're probably going to die anyways because the game is way too hard. So you can keep going if you want, but if you really want to quit, just press Q. You're done, right? If you're ready to restart again, hit the space bar. So I played this game a bunch, mostly because I wanted to make it a little better. But then I didn't want to make it that much better, so I didn't create a weapon, right? I figured, hey, there's always next time, right? And next time is Monday, so I'll be participating in that. So these are the lessons learned, right? So the submitting game was impossible, like I said. I didn't have time to test it, and I would have tested a little better, right? I would have tested it a little better. I would have used my time better. So the first 4 days, nothing. I had nothing. I was messing with something called Tiled Map Editor. So I don't know if you guys ever played StarCraft, but when you play StarCraft, use map editor, and you can mess around with the map, and you can add in all this functionality into the map. Tile does that. It lets you add functionality in. Getting it to load in Python was a little hard, especially with Pygames. So it gets encoded in certain XML, and dealing with that problem was not worth it for my week. So I would have just started really simple like I ended up. Would have started simple, built something really simple, and then spent the rest of the time upgrading it. I think that's huge. And then the last lesson, I think that the one thing that I did pretty well was I took it seriously. I told myself I was going to do it before I did it. And then when I didn't do it, and it was Friday, I thought, well, I'm still going to do this. So I spent my weekend working on it. There's not a financial incentive. People tend to take seriously those things they pay for or they get paid for. But I think if you stick to this, then you actually learn a lot and you get a lot of satisfaction out of it. So if you want to do it, it's next week, and I would say don't quit. So here is the GitHub link to the Evolution of Evil, which was the game I created. And for that, I will show you any code that you want to see and take any questions that you might have. Any questions? Oh, yeah.
So I saw you have an event defined, but how does one of those events turn into a event?
Oh, how does the event end up in the buffer?
Yeah.
I put them there. So I'll show you that code very quickly. And actually, so here's one type of event. I believe this is one type of event, right? It's a key event, right? A key event is something that you're inputting into the system. So that's one type of event. Pygame.key.getPressed. You can actually, if you go down to the key events, event and pygame.getEvent, pygame.quit, pygame.key down, right? So events are for handling everything kind of the same way, right? Anything that happens.
So there's like an application that finds it and key down.
You can define the events. So yes, there's internal events defined, like key down, right? And then on top of it, you can define events. So you can define the events all the way. Well, you can define them anywhere, but they're what's the name for it? I don't want to say globals because they're not globals, right? They're constants. They're module level constants, right? So you define them as module level constants in all caps, and then you assign them a value, and then you create an event for them, right? You create an event for them, and then that event has to get put into that buffer. So is up here, right? I created an event for dead, right? Dead event is user event plus 3. I think there's a whole bunch of space for these user events. From what I understand, it's kind of like an integer, right? And then right down here, the dead event happens if you're playing the game and a rectangle collides, then we post a dead event, right? A rectangle of the enemy collides with the player. We post a dead event, and then we can go through that event processor, and if the dead event happened, you're dead, right? It makes it pretty simple. There's a couple other events that I posted, and one of them is the switch level event, right? Switch level event, it gets posted when this time state init goes off. And that lets me know that, hey, it's time to switch level, right? So there's a timer too where you can post events at a certain time, right? So set timer, make enemy. And actually this is a while back, but I believe the set timer sets the timer and does that event at that period of time, so that frequency, right? So it makes an enemy that often. I played around with those numbers a little bit so that the timer would make enemies faster or slower depending on the stage we're at. Make sense? Any other questions? Yes.
Like how's this Pi Week work? Because you said you were talking about like raids from other people.
Yeah. So actually, I'll go to the website really quick so far. So
Like, is there like a week for development, a week for?
there is a week to get it all done. So it's 1 week, right? They don't want you to know like or start anything too early. It's an honor system. So there's the next challenge is up here. So the theme voting started. So these are the themes that might come up. I never saw that coming. Here, I'll make them bigger. I never saw that coming. It's too dangerous. Los Angeles has been saved. I don't know what's wrong. Is there's something wrong with Los Angeles? Storms dying down. They're behind everything. So and then you just create any type of game really. So some people said beforehand like I'm gonna build this game, and then they just did it anyways, even though it didn't really match the theme. But also if you want to get actual code, just go to the game section, right? All these are games. They're zip files. You download them, you run them. You can play any of the games, right? I'm way down here somewhere around here, right? I made it on the list. Yeah, right here. There we go, right there. Like maybe it was a low C average, but thank you. So I'm gonna go off on a high note, so thanks a lot.